our Backpages podcast. My name's Barney Hoskyns. I'm here with my colleague Jasper Murison-Bowie.
Hi, Barney.
We are minus Mark Pringle this week. He is probably at this very moment jetting off to his Tuscan retreat.
Lucky man.
The Pringle compound. And so you won't be hearing the inimitable sort of Basil Brush style laughter of Mr. Pringle this week, but he'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We wish him a very happy holiday. We are joined today by our guest, Ian Penman. Welcome.
Hi, Barney.
Delighted to have you here, Ian. It's a great honour. Ian is really, I mean, all these awful words that we like, icons and legends and yada, we hate them, don't we? Yes, we hate them, but you are nonetheless a legend of music writing. You know, in the history of music journalism, you have a very certain place, and you are just publishing this very week a collection of long essays that you've written for the London Review of Books and City Journal in America. It's called It Gets Me Home, This Curving Track. It is published by Fitzcarraldo Editions, and it is bloody brilliant.
Thank you.
I just feel, let's establish that from the get-go. There is some really superb writing in this collection. Anthony Quinn just reviewed it in The Guardian, just gave it a rave review. I mean, it's, what can I say? It just sort of takes writing about popular music and really sort of digging deep into all the sort of possible ways of looking and hearing at artists to sort of a new level for me. I've read some of these pieces before, a few in the LRB. How wonderful that people can still write like this and are allowed to, given the space, to write about music in this way. We might have thought it was like dead and buried a long time ago.
It's something I've wanted to do for ages, and I was just lucky that they sort of asked me at the right time, you know.
What was the first piece that kind of set you down this road?
The first piece, with the mod piece, the original title of the book actually was going to be related to the mod piece. There's the Pete Townsend quote in the opening paragraph, is, "I look all white, but my dad was black."
Yes.
And that was the working title for the book.
That would have been interesting. Yeah.
But saner minds prevailed. You know, the marketing department, especially in America, it was never really on as a...
No, it was never going to fly, was it?
There would have been, as the young people say, a Twitter storm, you know. But at the very least, I think. And there's also the additional problem, it might have been filed under misery memoir or something rather than music essays. Yeah. But that was... I think that's what links them, in a sense. There's this black-white thing that goes throughout it, you know. And it was only after, really, when I was looking through, trying to choose which ones to use, that it came to light, that I realised that there was this theme, you know. On top of which, I suppose there's a kind of buried memoir there almost, you know. It's without actually being boorishly autobiographical or anything, you know. There is a story there of how I came to this stuff. You know?
Yes.
It's like when I was a teenager in flattest, dullest Norfolk, you know, in the 70s, before punk, all these incredible soul records, you know, which had a punk-like effect on me, you know. Yeah. Just like, well, you probably had the similar thing, you know. I was lucky enough to have there was a backstreet soul shop in King's Lynn, a sort of northern soul outpost, but they also had lots of southern imports and stuff, you know. So every week I would go down there and buy all this stuff. And week after week you would hear this stuff, and it was just, you know, wow, Swamp Dog or whatever, you know. And it did have a pre-punk effect on me, you know. It's like only 14 or 15 or something, you know. In fact, the first piece of music writing I ever had published was, my dad was in the RAF, so we were on an RAF base, and they had this free sheet, which was mostly, you know, shopping offers at the local NAFI and local news, and I did a singles column for them. If anyone has one, I'd really like to see it. But, you know, they were expecting me to write about, I don't know, you know, the chart acts of the moment, or Bowie or whatever. And instead, it was like Millie Jackson, Swamp Dog. It was a great year for soul singles, but I think I never...
So what year was that? This was late 70s?
Yeah, it must have been 75-ish, I think.
Wow.
74, 75. Yeah. I didn't get asked to write a second one, but...
Yeah,
But anyway,
maybe King's Lynn wasn't ready for Swamp Dog or Millie Jacques.
Johnny Taylor, I've Been Born Again.
Great.
I mean, there was just one after
Well, that
the
does
other.
say it probably would have been 74, 75 in that case. Yeah. We will talk in due course about how you came to write on the NME, and I might even mention my first memories of connecting with you in those days.
Halcyon days.
Well,
Mirror.
but I think we really should talk about what's in this book. I mean, so in a way, the mod piece that you mentioned is slightly the odd one out, isn't it? Because the others are all kind of dedicated. I'm not going to call them profiles, but they are they're essays dedicated to specific artists.
Yeah, although it does contain a lot of the themes in miniature, I think. The interesting thing about music writing, in a sense, I mean, both of us, it's like it's come and gone in our lifetime. It's very odd. When I was born, there wasn't any, and now it's a kind of twilight time. Now there isn't any.
Yeah.
Well,
in a way,
it's been.
Well, I mean, you say that, but there's more than ever. It's just that it's not that people are necessarily getting paid to do it all the time.
It's in a different form.
It's in a very different form.
Yeah,
and I think there is a lot of music writing out there, and there's a lot of good music writing out there. It's just that the sources are so disparate that it's very difficult to have a sense of the overall music press in the way that maybe you used to be able to.
Well, the virtues of something like The Enemy was how intense it was, so much packed into a small space, and it was a conversation, I think. And that's a problem I've had with the previous book, choosing pieces for that. Stuff that I had a good memory of, stuff that was interesting in the context of that week. You were having a conversation with the other writers, with the readers. You take it out of that context, it can suddenly fall a bit flat, So on the one hand, that's the virtue, but it's also the drawback of some of the stuff. The lovely thing about the pieces in this book is you can take your time on them, and you can... Hopefully, they're the sort of pieces people might return to, and they are very carefully arranged. So there's all kinds of little references and echoes in them that may only reveal themselves on a second reading or something.
I think it's certainly true that one could go from any of the essays and explore the themes that are being kind of brought together in such a clear way. They make great starting points for further research, if you will, and I think in that sense it is the kind of thing that one would go back to because of that ability to just dive into all the different things that are discussed and alluded to in a multitude of different ways.
Well, it starts with Mod and with all these young guys having their lives, turned upside down by soul music and stuff, at a time when there really wasn't such a thing as youth culture or anything. They literally started inventing it at that point.
Yeah.
And the book ends with Prince, which is the kind of a slightly mournful ending. I'm not going to use end of an era because that's obviously not true. That there's lots of great music about, there's lots of great writing about, But there is a sense of a kind of arc there, of a little history, somewhat.
In the intro, you talk about a very long and oddly dispiriting goodbye to Prince. Maybe we'll talk about Prince a little bit. I just want to mention, one of the things I was thinking when you were just speaking was, these are pantheon artists that are not going to kind of go away. People will want to read about Charlie Parker and Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley in 100 years, I think. I hope, I pray. And they should definitely, one hopes they will come to this book, because there's so much pleasure in reading you on these artists. You just think about them in ways you haven't before. It's like just having a light shone on aspects of somebody's career that you hadn't considered before. And you reveal so much about their lives, their personalities, and their music. You write so beautifully about Sinatra, Charlie Parker, Donald Fagen, the wonderful Fagen piece, which is essentially apropos his own collection, Eminent Hipsters. We were lucky enough to feature in our Steely Dan anthology. Apart from anything else, our tastes are broadly simpatico. I've always loved the things that you've loved, and I read you on artists that I loved and learned so much about when I was writing on the NME. Your pieces about sort of Ricky Lee Jones and things like that. We've talked about Ricky Lee Jones, we've talked about Tom Waits. It's nice to feel that kind of aesthetic camaraderie. What was the next piece that you wrote after you said that was kind of the way into this sort of third wind of your career. What was the next big piece that you wrote?
I think, strictly speaking, I think the mod and the James Brown, which I did for City Journal, were the first pieces. The order they're printed in the book, it starts with the mod, I think.
Yes, it does.
There's certain lines going through it. Like I said, there's mod, and then there's Presley, whose life was influenced so much by black music, you know, and then Steely Dan as well, obviously, by jazz music and so on. So there's these themes or echoes running through it, hopefully. But after, I think the next piece would have been Charlie Parker. And I think, I mean, not that you really think about these things so much when you're actually writing them, but as I say in the intro, I wanted to be able to write deeply seriously about some of these things without it being off-putting, you know, without it being academic or heavy or ponderous or
pompous, as you say again in the intro. Yeah.
And likewise, I wanted to tell the story of my love for this stuff and how it's deepened, you know. It's like it hasn't gone away, and it's actually deepened in these cases. And I've been listening to it for years, so you want to put that on the page. But again, you don't want to be too me. You know, I don't think my life is that interesting to most people. You know, the ideal reader, as well as people like yourself, would be someone who just happened along to it, could still read it, you know, and might want to listen to Charlie Parker for the first time, or Bill Evans, or whoever. Because personally, I mean, a lot of writing about something like jazz can be off-putting. If you don't know the history and the techniques, you know, and all that kind of lingo. I would really like it if people, you know, got that from it and pursued it more, you know.
Jasper, what did you make of the Charlie Parker
Yeah,
piece?
I mean, the Charlie Parker piece is the one that I've read. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of it, because I really, really enjoyed the way that you weave a tapestry of the different influencing factors on his life, but drawing on things other people have written about it in such a way that it makes it possible to get an overview in some way of what he might have been like, but not, because one of the themes is that it's so difficult to know what he was actually like. One thing I wanted to talk about was that even though I think you succeed in making it not academic, there's a sort of academic rigour about the way that you go about it, which I think, because it's done well, is what enables anyone to just come to it and look at it and see it. And in addition to that, some of the writing is, the style of it is just gorgeous. I mean, there's a passage that I've picked out from the Charlie Parker piece. Unearthly sonic signatures woven from everyday air, flurries of notes like Rimbaud's million golden birds set free. No one else could do this one thing he did exactly the way he did it. It's lovely prose.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to write about music in a way that makes you want to listen to it and makes you maybe have an image in your mind, but I think you do that and it makes you want to go and listen to Charlie Parker. When I finished reading the piece, I went and listened to Charlie Parker. And, you know, it's a great...
There's also a brief mention in the mod piece about Bill Evans, and in a basic sense, I think I almost feel, not to be too sentimental, although be sentimental. I don't have a problem. As anyone who knows me, I don't have a problem with sentimentality. But I feel a debt to some of these people, you know, and they've given so much. It's a kind of economy of giving something back, you know. The Charlie Parker piece, I do go into what makes him wonderful for people like him, but there is a section where I kind of, a devil's advocate type section, where I say, well, you know, there are what that might be, what the problems might be of getting to know him, you know, and stuff, or getting to know jazz. And
when you say, isn't this obsession with technique alone a bit lopsided, a bit inhuman? What about emotional sway? I love Parker's music. It's not what I would choose to smooth anyone into jazz appreciation. And also, he rarely admits softer moods or qualities, anything of drift, reflection, loss. I think that's slightly the problem I've had with Bird, actually.
And in fact, that was a section that I enjoyed a lot, because I wouldn't say he's my favourite saxophonist. I mean, I play the tenor sax, so obviously...
Yeah.
Bird was never going to be my favourite saxophonist anyway.
Yeah.
But even so, Charlie Parker's not my favourite saxophonist, jazz musician, full stop. Partly because of that technique issue, where it's so much about the brilliance and the flurries of notes. And for me, jazz music, other music is not about how many notes you can play and how quickly. It's
Yeah.
the notes that you play, the spaces you leave, all of that stuff. And that's one of the things I find important in other jazz, like Miles Davis and
Yeah.
whatever. But it's nice to read a piece about Charlie Parker that actually raises critically this issue of, well, is this technique taken to, is this sort of wankery kind of just taken to its
Technical
extreme,
term.
you know?
I had the
Yeah.
same problem with Coltrane, for instance. I wouldn't admit it to anyone, but for years,
It's very
you know,
difficult to admit.
I like his, I like the earlier stuff, the earlier funnier stuff. No, the earlier more melodious stuff. I love that. But when he starts to go, what Philip Larkin called the Indian snake charmer stuff, I'm not sure. And for years, and that's one of the things about the book is it's the result of years and years. It's partly a result of my age, that I've been listening to and certainly reading. I mean, I've got a whole wall of books, and I'm just lucky that it paid off, eventually. But the problem with Parker and some figures like that is you get some people writing about him just from the angle of the messy private life, and then you get some jazz people saying, well, that's got nothing to do with it. You just
about
write
the
about
virtuoso
the
playing,
chords,
blah, blah,
so,
yeah.
well, neither position is true, I don't think. I think they have to be woven together. And an example in the Parker piece of disguised autobiography is the section where it says about he went too far, too fast in one direction, boxed himself in, he developed certain muscles at the cost of others, which is an echo of how I felt at times with my freelance writing. I got very good at being a freelance writer. I'd get up in the morning with a blank page, and within hours you could have something that was pretty spiffy, full of vim and spunk. But you learn, you develop certain muscles, and you could quote that bit you just quoted verbatim, that there's nothing in it of drift, reflection, softer moods. And after years and years, I was lucky enough to have, these essays represent that chance of being able to have the drift and the reflection and the softer moods, And I was just lucky to have two publications that would allow me to spend months, even years, even years, in the case of the Prince piece.
Yes.
And it is lucky, I've got a partner who supports that, I can spend the time doing that. And the
Could
two
you support
publications.
me too? One of the things I love, Ian, about these essays is that you unapologetically, it's everything in the kitchen sink, isn't it? You bring everything into it. There's no well, I'm not going to write about the personality of this, what James Brown did, what kind of a sort of shut down tyrant he was. And I think that's more honest. I think we, as consumers, as fans, we do experience the whole caboodle in a way, don't we? When we're a fan of somebody, it's everything. I love the way you write about Sinatra, because it doesn't feel like when you write about the obvious things that we know about Sinatra, the mob, his involvement in democratic politics, all of that stuff. It to me, it is all pertinent. It's all relevant. It's all part of the same thing that we call Sinatra.
It's mostly a product of my own reading. That was, over the years, it goes back, some of it goes back, decades too. Even the stuff that I was known for at the NME, like half jokingly, like the Roland Barthes stuff and so on, that is still somewhere in there, in a different form. But like with Sinatra, you want to write about the texture of it, the spaces, in a way. Again, I said, without being off-putting, without being too musicological, you want to find, pinpoint what it is you love about this. I suppose over the years, the obsession, I suppose, the magnificent obsession is the voice, is singers. That's, pretty much what I've been going back to over the years. And the jazz thing is, I've been listening to it for years, since my teenage years, but I've never really written about it before, partly through what we were saying before. I was put off by it, by not being enough of a jazz buff or a jazz bow. I didn't know enough about the kind of music.
To feel like you deserved to write about it. Right.
So it was partly at long last, love. At long last, I have a chance to write about these figures, to take my time over it.
Talking about Roland Barthes, we have to sort of go back, because I mean, I think that one of the trajectory of your career before you started writing these essays, there was still very much. I mean, this may sound very inside baseball for listeners, but it's fascinating to me, so we're bloody well going to talk about it. But there was this whole kind of cliche, wasn't there, that the enemy was somehow brought down by Ian Penman and Paul Morley, because their writing became so abstruse and complicated and referential that nobody could understand it anymore. People who've grown up going to sort of pub rock gigs and reading reviews of, Eddie and the Hot Rods just didn't really know or want to know who Roland Barthes was. Now, fast forward the tape, and as you say, Barthes is still somehow kind of embedded in your writing. But now you write with so much more kind of heart and just emotional, I think, openness. There's so much feeling and so much love in these essays. It doesn't feel, Jasper talked about academic rigor. There's an academic kind of layer to it, but it is not off-putting. It's very welcoming. It's very inviting. Would you say that when you look back, and I also have to just mention just how intimidating I found you when I first tiptoed into NME in probably late 1980, because my memory, and there's a picture that Danny Baker tweeted of you and Monty Smith in that corner, and you felt like you were sort of running this kind of just this sort of gamut of this terrifying gamut. When you walked in, you guys would be in the corner, and the wit was withering. And I was just sort of terrified of saying anything that you and Monty would. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Dorothy Parker here.
Yes, very much. That's how it felt. It was like, oh God, I better not say anything at all.
I think people were bringing a lot of their preconceptions.
Of course,
to it, I think, and it fed on itself. And the whole myth, I think, is ludicrous for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
I will admit, I was young. I was
full of vim and spunk.
Yes, especially the spunk. Vim was going up my nose. No, I was young, and you know, you're young, you're having fun. You can be a bit glib, and you are kind of, we're kings of the world. It can be a bit like that. But there was an enormous sense of pleasure and fun and play about it. I mean, that was what the point of the quotes were from. They were used in a kind of, like throwing lots of sweeties up in the air and seeing which came down, and I'm not an academic. I didn't go to college for one single day, I think entirely autodidactic. I mean, I can't speak for Paul, although we did spend a lot of time together, especially after hours. But that was one of the paradoxes of this ludicrous idea that we brought down the empire. Is that one complaint was that we were these forbidding, doomed Joy Division, with dark clouds over our heads.
Which you certainly
long clouds,
which and of course, nor was Paul.
And abstruse writing that pseudo semi-academic, And then the other cliche was that we were somehow out of touch with the roots man, this, apolitical glib, running around drinking expensive cocktails and making silly remarks. Well, those two things don't go together, and they also don't take into account the fact that I was a fairly lazy young man. If you look back to the enemy, there's not that a huge amount of my stuff. And what there is, a lot of it's about TV, a lot of it's about film.
Yeah.
I was on the editorial staff, so I did, it's like, I'm not sure who would find a piece on the Rockford Files forbidding and abstruse, but, and Robert De Niro and Coronation Street and stuff. No one said at the time that it was, there may have been a brief period in 1979, a brief 6-month period where I was personally unhappy and stuck it to a number of rock bands, but it was fun. I think it's very much, this myth has grown up as a convenient excuse for some people. It's post history. It was never mentioned at the time.
And also,
maybe the reason wasn't our fireworks box. Maybe it was a lot of dull articles about indie bands that put people off. Or kind of rather dull, long political pieces. Or you could pick, anyone could write a history and say, oh, it was that strain of the enemy which put people off, or it was that, I don't know.
Well, and also, Ian, I mean, so there's two other factors in the just ingrained, like, British suspicion of people who are a little too clever for their own good, shall we say. It's sort of anti-intellectual bent. And also that we were, tipping into the 80s, which was a decade of, bright, shiny surfaces and fun, well, cocktails, to refer to each other. I mean, we weren't supposed to be taking this stuff too seriously anymore, were we? We were supposed to be dressing up and dancing.
Well, there is. You wrote about soul music. I did a bit. Danny did a bit. But there was also that aspect to it as well. A slight suspicion of those values. I think of the kind of nightclubbing values, as opposed to the grim, authentic pub where the serious young men, the last gang in town kind of ethos, which I never knew anything about, and I'll freely confess, that my knowledge of rock and everything was pretty sketchy at that point. I'd grown up mainly with soul and reggae and stuff, and I only learnt about a lot of that stuff later, so it was a bit of a mystery to me, some of it, and I didn't understand how anyone could worship Lou Reed. Just seemed like a thoroughly unpleasant geezer to me,
Well, he was that. I think he was probably more than that. Yeah, you didn't. You are one of those who've suffered the Lou Reed interview. How was your experience?
Well, I think I threw him a bit. Actually, I sat down and he did what he always does. He started, monotone, just talking about amplifiers and guitars.
The same experience.
Yeah. But then I mentioned something that I just read, which was by a black writer who wrote about pimps and
Iceberg Slim or somebody like that?
It was the other guy.
Right.
But anyway, and I was talking about this album that they'd made, and his face kind of went like I'd one-upped him. He didn't know about this album, this New York album by this, and after that point, he was fine with me, it was
exactly.
like I'd sidestepped him. So I'm like, oh, this limey is a bit cool,
Sure. I think I had the same experience when I mentioned that I was reading Gore Vidal's memoir, Palimpsest. He happened to be reading it at that very moment too, and therefore suddenly it was sort of, okay, you're worthy of interviewing me.
Yeah.
So
dreadful haircut he had though.
Oh, he had like a. So did you get him in his mullet years?
Yes.
You got the mulleted Lou. The mullet had been shorn at that point. Yeah, it was horrific.
I interviewed him and Willie Nelson fairly close together.
Not together. Yeah.
Not together. That would have been interesting. Yeah.
Uncle Lou and Uncle Willie. But so there was a sort of reaction, wasn't there, to, name dropping the likes of Barthes and Derrida in the Pages of the NME. You sort of migrated to some degree to The Wire, where references to Derrida were slightly more acceptable.
Yeah, I think if you look back on the pieces, there's far less of it than, again, it turned into it was done with fun and tongue in cheek, but to come back to more recent writing, the problem with a lot of people who do use that Barthes and Derrida to talk about music is often that they'll quote those people as so and so says, or as Lacan says, and they kind of file it under. My hope is that I don't do that. I hope that it's more a sense of like it permeates. And it's like jazz people would say, you play with someone and their influence rubs off on you. I would hope that's what's happened here, is that stuff is still there, but I don't do it in a kind of as so-and-so says to explain something somehow, because I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can say A plus equals,
No.
Yeah, I think that's very legitimate. I think it's certainly true that it does permeate. I mean, there's a piece that I added this week from The Wire, which is a review of, I don't know if you remember, Pole, German electronic music producer. You reviewed his album. And it does sort of permeate that. There's a bit... Pole may have reached his polar limit. Betke should now maybe unclench his stylistic hold, wander out of his trance music bunker and let himself be jarred by some other sound, joust with something a little more inflammatory and loose. Other with a capital O, as in presumably Lacan's l'autre. I think it permeates. And I think, although it's maybe less intimidating, because you can read that and not be like, oh, as Lacan says, and I think that's good. I think there's a way in which that can be intimidating if you don't know. You're reading this, you're like, why is this O capitalized? Is it a typo? Like, is it a printing error? Like, so I think there's a way in which that can be intimidating as well, but it does allow for some really interesting writing.
Well, each magazine has a different conversation going on with its readers, and like you say, it would more in The Wire. It would be more. I think there's a lot more to be written as well about that's another area like jazz is computer music and stuff. Also, I did a review of couple of years ago about that, which I raised the question. The writing about it is so bad. It's like art criticism. It's opaque. These two wonderful albums from French albums from the 50s or 60s were reissued on vinyl by Mago Editions. Mago. Wonderful, amazing. And they had these sleeve notes, which were just so bad. They were like the worst art criticism. There's so much historically, sonically to be said about that stuff, especially the French stuff, when it happened, post-war. The people who did it were involved with French radio. Some of them were involved with the resistance. The gradual development of computer encryption stuff, it all goes together, and there's so much there to write about. And instead, you end up with this really dry kind of tick-the-box writing, which jazz, computer music, and to an extent reggae, they're in a competition to see who the fans can write the worst
It is interesting that you bring up liner notes, though, because I think some of my favourite writing about jazz is actually on liner notes. There's a lot of great writing, particularly on the Ellington records.
50s and 60s.
There's just some brilliant writing on the backs of those records that is a real treat to go and actually pick up an old record and just get to read that.
All that stuff on Reprise, Dean Martin and Sinatra. And, of course, Sinatra released albums by some of his jazz heroes on Reprise. One of the first albums he released was a Ben Webster album, I think.
Right.
And some of the sleeve notes, like you said, they're really... they're full of spunk.
Recurring theme.
I had to chortle in the Prince piece where you start one sentence. Readers of Lacan may object that the subject seems a bit old to be having any kind of mirror stage moment. And I loved it because it's like, well, I wondered just what sort of the Venn diagram with how many readers of Lacan are also huge fans of Prince. But the fact is, it's a piece for the London Review of Books, and it's fine to talk about Lacan. Well, if you don't know who Lacan is, find out,
And also, again, to be fair, I quoted a bit from that Pole piece. Not that anybody's heard of Pole. I mean, not that there's any reason to have done. But in that, there's precisely the other side of it, which is the emotion, the heart. You say, from track to track, there's not much textual difference. There's a definite limit to these small, self-generated variations on a pattern. The dominant mood is so etiolated/claustrophobic that you start to wonder if this isn't the sonic equivalent of trying to have a conversation with someone whose low, monotone mumble never perks. To be honest, at one point I had to break off and play a Prince track just to check I was still alive, which is brilliantly funny, but also does kind of
nice
add
link
that...
there.
Yeah, very good link.
Smooth link.
Did you plan that, Jasper? We have to talk a bit about Prince, don't we?
Oh,
because,
I
mean, and again, I'm really with you every step of the way in the sense that I think Love Sexy was the last sort of really great work. Maybe Alphabet Street was sort of the last just awesome piece of music.
It gets odder as the years
go on. It is very odd. If you listen on Spotify, you have to listen to the entire album. It's just one track. It's very peculiar.
But that's how it was.
It was
not on the album, obviously, but he insisted that the CD come out like that. Yeah.
Right.
I initially bought it on cassette, I remember, and then I had it on vinyl. I've never actually had it on CD, so I never had that experience, but it is...
But you write superbly about Prince and the bizarre end to his life, the pitiful and really unexpected end to his life, and just how alone he was. I mean, parallel there with James Brown, these two
Presley,
men,
yeah.
these two insane control freaks. Maybe Presley was less of a control freak, but certainly James Brown and Prince, they were kind of autocrats in their own way, and they both died alone in pretty sad circumstances. Prince's story is extraordinary. He was really the most eccentric superstar of the 80s, I think.
Well, there's another example like Charlie Parker as well, I think, I was rather... again, his fans, there's lots of books about Prince, but it can be a slightly depressing feeling reading them all together. They somehow managed to celebrate him but miss what's good about him. To go back to the thing about the technical aspects, I think I've got it as a footnote in there where I was listening to Dirty Mind and thinking, wow, this was really ahead of its time. Yeah. Just the way he uses synths and doesn't overuse them.
Yeah.
And just the feeling of it, and it's so simple, crisp. There's so much space in it, and it's so punchy. And one of the tracks reminded me of Van Halen. This is all in the footnote. And I thought,
Jump is a little bit princey.
And I looked on Wikipedia at the relevant entries, and Van Halen get a whole kind of a section about how way ahead they were, and it goes into detail about the Oberheim synth and what bits of the Oberheim, wow. And then you go to the Prince one, and it's just said it's got literally a sentence, kind of, and a slightly condescending, you know.
He used some synths on the track,
it's just like.
Thing,
And there is an aspect, and the same with James Brown. You know, I'd never actually read. It could be I just missed it, but I hadn't read anything about just how those early James Brown pieces were put together in the studio. You know, and it's fascinating. You know, and how the bass was put in, blah blah blah. And I think, especially in terms of black artists, they sometimes get celebrated for that freakiness and eccentricity, dark private life and stuff. And the sheer scale of the technical innovation sometimes can be just lost, you know, completely.
I think you're
and when you say
right.
celebrated for that freakiness, also demonised for it. And I think that then colours the perception of that technical side as well, because people don't want there to be that overlap. You know, people want to say, well, these are the great technical innovators and they're very serious people and blah blah blah. But that's a separate thing. But it's not true at all.
With Prince, the technical and the personal go together again, I think, because. Like you say, the last great album, you know, after that, he seemed to lose interest in playing around. There was a great period towards, you know, where he was playing around with the sound of his voice, you know, altering it. And on that final album, you've got all these layers of sound, you know. And after that point, he just seemed to lose interest in experiment. He went back to a very basic funk, trying to be a rapper, not very successfully, and very, very retro funk. And the same thing happened in his private life at the same time. Something happened around that point, and I'm not sure that it was drugs at that early, but there's a quote there from one of his roadies saying, you know, he got everything he ever wanted after Purple Rain, and then found he didn't want it or something. I think there was, you know, something went wrong at the end of the 80s, and I'm not sure. That's why I said it was a long and slightly dispiriting piece. You know, not that I didn't enjoy writing it, but after a few years of it, you know, I didn't feel any closer to finding out what that was that he lost or why he went in that direction.
I mean, I got very depressed by so many of those Prince albums that came out. They were just sort of funk by numbers, weren't they, in so many ways. And when that Piano and a Microphone record came out last year, I think it was last year, wasn't it? I mean, it just reminded me of how extraordinary he was and how moving he was.
Yeah.
That 17 days, it's just devastating. And the version of Mary, Don't You Weep. The second thing that they've released, originals that just came out, I found, I'm afraid, again, slightly dispiriting. It just wasn't interesting.
More of the same, really.
Him at the piano. I mean, I saw him on tour in 80. Well, we were both at the Lyceum show.
I was going to ask you.
And then I did 2 or 3 dates on the road with Prince in America, and the highlight was always when he would just sit on this kind of podium with this baby grand piano and play How Come You Don't Call Me Anymore. And he just died and went to heaven.
Always thought you'd be by my side, mama. Now you're gone. What I wanna know, baby, what we had was good. How come you don't call me anymore? Yeah, anymore.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It has his voice, you know. Why would you want to do bad rapping when you've got a voice like that, man? You know, it's like
that can weep and scream and cry, and
that's why I was saying at the end of the Prince piece, I was kind of imagining that he'd do one of those albums like Joni did, where she revisits early material, and you can feel the intervening years in her voice, you know. And I wanted him to do that. I wanted him to go back to the early stuff, but do it as a proper grown-up man, and not pretend that he's this pretend party all the time, party animal. You know, oh, for God's sake, man, you know, you're a middle-aged man now, and he didn't even do it.
No.
You know, he was a workaholic, you know.
One kept longing for just a really stripped down kind of because I mean, really, he's at his best when he's most stripped down. To me, the peaks are kind of like Dirty Mind, Kiss, which is like just nothing really, and When Doves Cry. The more minimal side of Prince, I think, is the more when he's got like a huge band and.
A real
doing
band.
It's
never what we wanted from him.
No, but then he didn't probably
and...
care what we wanted, did he? And that's the saying. I mean, but
that was the problem I had with, funnily enough, with the Lyceum show, is that it was too rock bandy. It was too real and sweaty, and there was lots. That's my memory of it anyway. There's screaming guitar solos. I got the feeling he'd thought, "Oh, England, they love Led Zeppelin, they love hard rock," and he went more for that angle.
Well, it may be. I had seen him at the Ritz in New York not long before that, and it wasn't a completely different show, but it was absolutely brilliant. It was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. Somehow the Lyceum, maybe just because I'd seen the previous thing, it didn't mean as much. But you write really well about the Revolution, I think, and just everything that was so naff about Prince and the Revolution was also what made them so unique and different. He just didn't want to. He didn't want to just be like an R&B star. And that was something we talked about just the other day, was that he talked, I can't remember if it was an audio interview or just a piece where Prince said to Warner Brothers, he took,
early on.
Yeah, literally when he was first being signed, I think he took Lenny Waronker aside and said, "Don't make me just another R&B act on Warner Reprise." Because I'm a lot more than that. I want to do a lot more things. And he was like 19 at that point.
But sadly, he did it to himself eventually.
Yeah. We're probably going to move on. I will just mention the three sort of archival pieces of yours that we've chosen to feature you on the homepage this coming week. And one is John Fahey. There's a wonderful piece about John Fahey in your book. And this is one of the first interviews you ever did for the NME. You were telling me, and it's a great piece. 1979, John Fahey, the great kind of folk primitivist, fascinating figure.
It's one of the reasons to pick it is because it echoes with the more recent piece in the book. Like you say, it was one of the first interviews I did as a quote professional journalist. And when I look back on it now, the first few interviews I did, as a nervous 18, 19-year-old, and I just moved down to London. In fact, I moved down on my birthday, and that night went to see Annette Peacock at the Lyceum.
Welcome to London.
So it's my birthday, and I'm standing talking to Brian Case and Annette Peacock, two heroes who I've worshipped from afar. I don't know how I didn't lose it completely, because John Fahey, the first few people I interviewed, John Fahey, Annette Peacock, Wayne Shorter, and Joe Zawinul, and Jaco Pastorius from Weather Report at sort of 10 in the morning. And Brian Case was there as well again, funny enough.
Yeah.
And I look back on this, and it seems extraordinary now, that this lineup of figures.
Yeah, it wasn't Eddie in the Hot Rods, was it?
How did I miss out on the good stuff? How did I never manage to interview Chow and the
It was just going to be your whole career was just going to be like this.
Took it for granted.
Yeah.
Which I guess it may have been a psychic defence, because if you didn't, you might have been completely overawed. I remember going to see Annette Peacock. She lived way out in the country. It was like a bad Hollywood comedy from the 60s. She opened the door in a towel. She just stepped out. He showered. I don't know how I didn't faint, sort of thing, on a number of levels. But John Fahey, as I think I say in the piece, if I'd known, I would have bowed and said, "Maestro." It's like. But somehow, and in 1979, he was lovely. He was a lovely man, and very garrulous, very, very well read. Talked about all kinds. You just ask him a question, he'd just rattle off on all kinds of tangents, and lovely man.
The second piece is this remarkable piece you wrote about Nina Simone when she died, that you wrote for The Wire, which is just tremendous. You really grapple with what made her difficult, quote unquote difficult. You really interrogate that notion of Nina as difficult, and the
context that gives rise to it as well.
Absolutely.
Again, what you were saying about James Brown and Prince, she gets turned into this cliche lady, diva. Well,
Yeah.
what does that mean? What does it? It's kind of as if you've explained her somehow. She was a difficult drunken diva. Well, that doesn't explain anything. No. I came very close to putting that piece in the book actually, because partly because it would have been nice to have a female figure in there for one thing.
Yeah.
But and I really wish I could have had some Billy in there as well. But as I say, it's again. I'd listened to her for years and hadn't read anything just about her voice and about how the politics and the difficulties, how are they present in the voice? What is it about her voice that is so powerful? And, it's just on the verge of kind of losing it, just on the verge of weakness almost, or a fall or something, but it's at the same time so powerful, But,
I mean, she was impossible. Mark and I went to see... probably one of the last shows she did here. It was at this awful blues festival called Bishopstock in the West Country, and Nina was one of the headliners. And, I mean, she just pulled a classic Simone. She sort of played about 3 songs, and then she got in a grump, and she just left the stage for about half an hour. I mean, it was so bizarre. And yet, you'd still have paid money to see it.
I think there are a lot of reasons. I mean, most journalists I know have a Nina story, and everyone can write them out. I mean, I think a lot of it probably had to do with being ripped off as well. I think she probably felt that, I mean, what I was saying about being a freelance writer earlier as well, you work your whole life and then you get to the age she was, and she was probably in a position a bit like George Clinton as well. I was shocked to discover, has no money basically, and has to be on the road. And you get to a certain age, you shouldn't be in that position. There's all sorts of reasons, and I can imagine being Nina and being on a stage, and in a sense, waking up, he's looking around. What the fuck am I doing here? I'm a 70-year-old woman. I've worked all my life. I'm adored, and I've done amazing things. I was part of the American century, and here I am. Fucking,
and my baby just cares for me. Is in an ad and making somebody lots of money. It's not coming to me.
None of it is going to her. So I can imagine her being a bit grumpy, maybe, to say the least.
She was a damaged and angry person, but a giant.
That voice is just, and it was someone that I'd loved for years and hadn't written about. So, and that was an example of what I was talking about earlier, of getting up in the morning and having a blank thing, and in a few hours there it is.
Yes, exactly. A very different story of a female performer, Kate Bush, is the last piece. This was a London Review of Books piece that you wrote about Kate. It was kind of the return of Kate Bush, wasn't it? Was it just when she was about to do all those shows, just down the road from where we're sitting now?
Horrendously overpriced tickets.
You write beautifully about Kate Bush, and again, I agree with an enormous amount of what you say. Although I do like probably at least a third of the sensual world very much, and I sort of get your point that she was at her best when she was, in a sense, most unfettered by any idea of what she should do. And
very similar to Prince in a lot of ways. So
she was kind of the female Prince, wasn't she?
Because there was that moment in the 80s where they were using the new technology and using it in very odd, freaky ways, unexpected ways, but not self-indulgent. They seem to know just when to stop,
I mean, musical ways, not technological ways. I think that's one of the key things.
Actually, that's a perfect segue to our audio interview. Smooth. We do love smooth segues. No, but because Billy Gibbons says he's asked by interviewer Tony Sherman about ZZ Top using, sequences and things, and Billy says, "Well, I take the Frank Zappa approach, which is you throw the manual away and then turn the machine on, and that's what we do. And in a way, that the use of electronic instruments by Prince, Kate Bush, and others it's at its best when it's kind of when the manual's been thrown away and you feel like they're not just settling into kind of preset grooves, and they're just doing really quite innovative things.
Especially with someone like ZZ Top, where they're supposed to be this dusty, authentic, blues band, and they're using all this. I mean, one of my favourites from that era is Rough Boy by them.
Yes,
which is, on one hand, is awful because it has that 80s drum sound.
So many bad drums in the 80s.
Yeah.
And you immediately know what year, even what month, even what week it's recorded from the drum sound.
Yeah.
You know. But I love that song. I love that. You know, I could listen to it all day. But
Well, I could listen to "Give Me All Your Lovin'" probably 2 or 3 times a day. I remember Paul do not, for some reason, I remember being in an enemy editorial meeting, those notorious editorial meetings, and I remember I had just read Paul's singles column, and he'd made "Give Me All Your Lovin'" maybe the singles of the week, or one of the 2 or 3 singles of the week. I think they got it absolutely right there, that kind of blend of kind of hard blues and kind of 80s
they were one
mechanics.
They were one of the only rock bands I liked when I was a teenager, along with, you know, Little Feat, and I really liked that album. That's was it Waiting for the Bus, and Jesus Just Left Chicago.
Tres Hombres.
Yeah, I love that album.
I think that's my favourite.
Yeah.
I believe that because Enemies sent me out to interview ZZ Top in 1984, and for some reason it sticks in my mind that when the piece came out, the headline, someone said, and it was 2 out of 3 cats prefer whiskers, and someone said that was Ian Penman's headline. Is that possible? You probably wouldn't remember.
I don't know. I wasn't.
It's a sort of witticism you would come up with. Because the great joke about ZZ Top just was that the 2 of them had very long beards already by that point. But the guy named Frank Beard just had a moustache. We all thought that was hilarious. So maybe that was your headline.
I wasn't really into cats at that time. That came much later.
Okay. So maybe
it might
it
not
wasn't
have been
you.
me. I don't know. Probably
but
Danny, but I don't know.
It probably was Danny. Shall we listen to a bit
we've
of...
got this, as you said, Tony Sherman interview Billy Gibbons
from 1990, yeah.
And he talks about all sorts of stuff, but he talks about meeting muddy waters, and I think it'd be great to just listen to a clip of that.
Burlington, Iowa. There was a little blues show in Burlington, Iowa. We had not met Muddy Waters personally at that time. This was about 74. And Freddie King, Dusty, who had played with Freddie King, Frank.
Oh, he backed him. He played with him regularly, or?
Yeah, they were part of the band. You know, if they'd sit in, and Freddie said, "Yeah, you don't know Muddy." He said, "Come on in here, boys." And there it was, the Fender bass case stretched between 2 chairs, 5 guys, card game going on. Freddie King said, he walks in, first of all, he pulls out a roll just to get some attention. And he said, before y'all going to get in any of this, you got to meet my boys. This is ZZ Top. I want to meet Muddy Waters. He had a half royal flush. He kind of looked over his shoulder, nodded, and went, "Pleased to meet you."
Oh, Muddy said that.
Yeah,
Funny.
and
Like
then
little
went back.
The smile went on for 2 seconds, then he went back to the game.
Doesn't he say somewhere, there's a great quote, it's certainly in the piece, which is that Muddy, I've really taken it up, Muddy said to Billy Gibbons, you know, you don't have to be the best, just try to be one of the good ones.
That's lovely.
Which is lovely. I don't know if maybe that's not in the clip, but I mean, Billy's just a delight to listen to an interview, this wonderful, laconic, not even that Texan a voice. I'm a huge Top fan, even when they got a little bit too mechanical in the 80s. Interesting, that interview, the album Recycler has just come out.
And they talk exactly about what we were sort of thinking, technology, rootsy sound, whatever, that he's talking about going back to that more rock sound after a long period of like sequencers and drum machines and all this kind of thing. So he goes into kind of why they've done that. And it's funny because I think Tony Sherman wanted to ask about all that sequence stuff in a kind of critical way, and is sort of relieved to hear that they're going to go back to that, which is interesting.
What was that great single they put out a couple of years ago? Was
I
it
Got to Get Paid.
Yeah,
Yes.
a version of a kind of rap. That was fantastic.
That was the best thing they've done in 20 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd forgotten about that. I'd get that out when I get home.
absolutely extraordinary. It was Rick Rubin. I mean, you have
You were
to
playing
hand
it
it
yesterday,
to
I
Rubin.
think, and it is...
Yeah, just the sound. It was. Like,
It is absolutely
hurricane.
thrilling.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, before you joined Rock's Backpage, it's just Mark and Paul Nye had a kind of works outing to the Hammersmith Odeon, as we still call it, of course, to see ZZ Top probably 4 years ago. And I think that album had just come out, and they played I Got to Get Paid, and it just floored me.
$25 lighters on my dresser, yes sir. You know I got to get paid.
There's another great track in them called Chartreuse, right? I mean, they're tremendous.
I've always heard down the years that no one has anything bad to say about Gibbons. You know, he's like one of the good guys, sort of thing.
He's definitely one of the good
like
guys.
with Michael Nesmith, there's various people you always hear good things about. They're still having fun, basically. They're still enjoying themselves, you know, which is...
Our friend, do you remember Lloyd Bradley?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Lloyd was in here as a guest just the other day. Funnily enough, we were talking about George Clinton, and we had Tom Vickers, who was the P-Funk's kind of Minister of Information. And like 2 days later, Lloyd told me that... So Tom Vickers has become a very close friend of Billy Gibbons, and Gibbons happened to be in town. And they went out to Nando's. Billy and Tom
God.
and Lloyd and their wives
Cheeky Nando's.
went out to Nando's, and Billy's sitting there, everyone's coming up. You're the guy from ZZ Top, you know, how's the chicken, you know. And, you know, he just was such a pleasure and so lovely to everybody.
Great inner
nice.
sleeve of Tres Hombres.
Yeah. I brought my copy in.
That was another one.
That.
That you know, interviewing Annette Peacock and John Fahey and Weatherport. Not long after that, I remember one of the gigs I reviewed was
The Top.
Parliament and Funkadelic
P-Funk.
at Hamilton. The classic with the UFO coming down.
We have it on Rock's Backpages.
Yeah,
We have it on Rock's Backpages.
4 or 5 hours. I don't think that's a particularly great review or anything, because I think I was kind of, you know, it's like just stunned. You know?
Right.
And 2 days later, you have to somehow make sense
Of the mothership.
Yeah.
How funny.
I mean, of all the people I've met and gigs, you know, if I had a time machine, I would, you know, that would be near the top. I would love to go back and see that again. You know?
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah, completely.
I think, much to my regret, we're running out of time.
Because you've got to edit this thing.
Yeah, I've got to edit this thing. And we haven't even got to any of the archive stuff that Mark so kindly selected for us.
Do you want to just skim through
I mean,
some of the...
there's some interesting stuff. There's a Dawn James piece from Rave 1965, which is interesting, historically speaking, because it's sort of about the stresses of pop life. And it's a sort of broad piece about whether or not it's hard work being a pop star, basically. There's a sort of bloke on the street being...
It probably
being
was
ushered.
in those days.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
when I was
her
writing about
point.
Scott Walker, you know,
Yeah.
it's like they worked. Well, their managers worked their arses
Right,
off. You know, it's
but
like-
the general public thought it was just a sort of laugh.
Oh,
They were just
yeah.
sort of swanning around. Like, you know, there's this guy who's being on the street, being ushered past a sort of Rolling Stones, being ushered into a theatre by the police escort, and he sort of goes, "Just starting work, eh? It's 5 o'clock. I've been at it all day. Lazy lot, these pop stars." And Dawn James makes the point, lazy? The Stones have been working all day too, travelling, being interviewed, making radio tapes for use in America. The man was on his way home, but they were yet to face the real work when they actually earned their money. And really, oddly, interestingly, at the end of the piece, it lists a bunch of artists who had breakdowns, nervous or otherwise, in this kind of slightly strange factual way. It sort of goes, PJ Proby, March 1965, told by his doctors to take it easy. Dusty Springfield, September 1964, collapsed in a dressing room while appearing in US show. This was her second breakdown.
Is Scott in there? Because that's what happened.
I
to
think
him.
he
He ran
had
off
a
to a
story,
monastery, yeah. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, he did.
And it's,
vodka and pills, you know, every day. It was
So
like,
it's a very odd sort of, I mean, quite an early piece along that sort of tack, which makes it interesting historically. So that's nice. And a really great piece about Aretha Mardin where he talks about Aretha Franklin. It's Robert Williams from Melody Maker 1969. And it's great because Aretha Mardin waxes lyrical about Aretha's piano playing and how it just forms the guide for
Now, how could you
arrangements.
not?
And
Yeah.
it's, you know, so that's a nice piece.
I could read that stuff forever, you know, the stuff about the Muscle Shoals and how it was recorded. And,
Well, you mentioned that a little bit
Yeah,
in
in my
the
intro,
intro. You talk about Dan Penn and Chip's moment. Guys are close to my heart.
Yeah.
And another Richard Williams piece about James Booker, who's someone I absolutely adore.
Yeah.
James Booker is just one of the most fabulous piano players across idioms to have sat down at the
I
instrument.
think it's worth reading out
Yeah.
this paragraph because it's beautiful.
It's great. It's a review from 100 Club, The Times, 76. His piano style is, by turns, incorrigibly flashy and starkly profound, in the manner of every New Orleans pianist since Jelly Roll Morton, and it was no surprise to hear him prefacing classics like Something You Got and Rock and Pneumonia with outrageously inappropriate extracts from Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky. It's great. There's a
Roll
great-
over Beethoven and tell Tchaikovsky the knees, right? But Booker was.
So that's a
was
great
extraordinary.
piece.
Yeah.
And Booker was wonderful.
There's two pieces about bands that I think are interesting. An early piece about the Modern Lovers. Not a lot was written about the Modern Lovers and Jonathan Richman. This is Bob Spitz in Crawdaddy, January 77. And then an interview with Ivy Rorschach, or however you pronounce it, of the Cramps from Melody Maker, which is great. Madness, Stone Roses, we've got it all. Stephen Wells on war. Black Grape on drugs, of course. A nice Dorian Linsky profile of Van Dyke Parks. I mean, how could that not be entertaining? It always is. Which are your
And
favourites?
just to bring it back, I know we've talked about Prince already at length, but this is a great Michelle Kirsch seeing Prince live, and the piece starts. Twice in my life I've shouted, "It's better than sex," and twice I've been wrong. First time I was chasing Pop Rock's Exploding Candy with Pepsi Cola on some street corner in Puerto Rico, and this Puerto Rican guy goes, "No, it isn't." Second time I was actually having sex but sort of forgot about it in all the excitement, and this Puerto Rican guy goes, "No, it isn't." I've just rung the Puerto Rican consulate and told them Prince is better than sex, and they said, we know. So it's true. Prince is better than sex, and this is on the highest authority.
Oh, that's very
just
good.
Just a very funnily written piece.
And that's the Camden Palace, isn't it? What
Yeah.
year, sorry, is it?
1988.
1988. Well, so Love Sexy.
Yeah.
So Love Sexy.
That's it, really, from
Great.
the archive sections, in the interests of keeping this to a listenable hour and
Well, we've
40 or
had too
whatever.
much fun, haven't we? We could certainly
gone on
talk for
forever,
another
yeah,
hour,
absolutely.
and it's sad that we can't, but we do have to bring it to a close. Those are among the highlights of new things going to the library this week for subscribers. There's tons of great stuff there, and the 3 free Ian Penman pieces that you really must read, and then you must go and buy his book.
Yes.
It
Can't stress
Gets
enough.
Me Home. This Curving Track. That title I think comes from a W.H. Auden
Yes, yeah,
poem, doesn't it? And you write about why you
Explains
chose
it,
to
yeah,
call it
yeah.
that. But it really is some of the best writing that I've ever read on popular music and related attendant issues. It's published by Fitzcarraldo Editions. Ian, you're doing various events,
Yes,
aren't
I
you,
am.
quote
yes,
unquote.
I'm leaving the house.
Circuit.
Well,
I
we've
ever-
dragged you out of the house today. I know that was quite
I thought
traumatic.
if I ever did a memoir about freelance life, it would be called Getting Out of the House.
Yes.
Like,
So just to briefly, tell us what you do. You're doing something at the London Review Bookshop, aren't you? And you're doing it...
that's not till September, but I think I'm doing a thing.
The word
thing
podcast.
Yeah. No, it's a live thing.
It is. They record it live.
Yeah.
But it's just nonetheless a podcast called A Word in Your Ear.
That's it. Yeah.
That'll
I
be
think
great.
that's next. It's the 20th or the 21st or 2nd. God, I'm not very good. Books. What was the other one? I've got. Oh yeah, and I'm doing a thing at Rough Trade to send you the dates.
Yeah, yeah.
The
We'll
dates
put-
on
we'll
top
put
of
some-
my head. But
we'll
yeah,
put
there's a
all
whole
this
bunch
on
of- it'll
stuff
be
in
on
the
Twitter as
description.
well.
And
Poor
yeah,
Boy 2.
can't stress enough, do go out and buy this book. It is great.
It
Thank you.
is great. It does beg the question at the podcast, are they going to raise this fantastic quote where apparently at the inaugural editorial meeting of Q, they basically say what we're about is everything that isn't Ian Penman and Paul
Yes,
Morley.
yes.
And you apparently went, great, my work is done. I do hope somebody raises that. It will be. It's fun. I did that podcast, and they're delightful
Yeah.
hosts. You'll have fun, and it'll be a great crowd.
The past is a different country.
Yes, it is, and the future's even more different. So, Ian, thanks so much for coming in. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Much
Very
more
much
fun
indeed.
than too much fun.
Too much fun. We will be back next week. Funny enough, with Richard Williams is due to come in, and we can ask him in person about James Booker
Can't wait.
at Arif Mardin and
Can't
many
wait.
other things. No, that would be a great honour. And so we're going to say goodbye, but we're going to leave you with a second clip from the Billy Gibbons audio interview,
That
which
indeed
is
we
Jasper,
are, which is where he talks about Stevie Ray Vaughan,
who had just
who
died.
just died at the time. So
Yeah,
we'll go out
fellow
on that.
Texan blues god. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for
Bye.
listening. Bye-bye.
I wanted to, unfortunately, ask you about Stevie Ray and just sort of see how you feel about that, because it really shocked everyone on Monday. Did you ever play with him?
Of course. Frank and Dusty, of course, grew up with him
In Dallas?
in Dallas. And just this morning we're talking about the time when they went to see Jimmy, and Stevie came in at the age of 10 and had learned his first song and wanted to show it off to Jimmy, and they were there going, well, wait a minute, where'd he come from? And it took years and years of perseverance and commitment and development for him to emerge as the artist that he did. And now to have been taken away from all of his fans at such an early age when he had so much seemingly ahead was a great shock, and I think I stand along the many who mourn the loss of another great artist.
That was Billy Gibbons in conversation with Tony Sherman in 1990, concluding this week's Rock's Backpages podcast. Many thanks to special guest Ian Penman, whose new book, It Gets Me Home, This Curving Track, is published by Fitzcarraldo Editions and available now from all good bookshops. The host was Barney Hoskyns, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison-Bowie. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com.
Kiss.